Good morning and welcome to my little podcast. I'm going to be talking today about Justin Welby, an archbishop who resigned. It's an unusual step as the Archbishop Justin Welby is head of the Church of England. He was appointed in 2013 and in 2024 in November, the Archbishop of Canterbury resigned from his position. He's the head of the Church of England and historically has been what we call primus inter pares, or first among equals, in the whole Anglican communion worldwide, although he has stepped back from that role recently. So he's the first Archbishop of Canterbury to resign, Justin Welby. And the background to all of this is the abuse, the serious abuse of many public school boys in the late 70s and right up until the early 1980s. And then I'll tell you the rest of the story when he was first exposed as an abuser. The reason that the Archbishop Justin Welby resigned was due to something called the Makin review. This was a review of the abuse of John Smyth, who was a barrister, married with, I think he's got one son and 2 or 3 daughters. The Makin review was a catalogue of missed opportunities to charge the late John Smyth. John Smyth himself died in 2018 with abuse and assault charges. The police were beginning to investigate this matter back in 2016, 2017. However, John Smyth died in 2018. The reason that Justin Welby resigned is simple. In 2013, he was appointed as Archbishop of Canterbury, and one of the first documents in 2013 that he looked at was a report from the Bishop of Ely about John Smyth as an abuser. Now, I can't go into the details of that because I want to keep the time of this down, but Welby did not ensure that the police were told of John Smyth's abuse back in 2013. He made an assumption that the police would pick it up, and he then made an assumption that once the police had picked that up, they would move that forward. He didn't check, and he was remiss, and accepts the fact that he was remiss in this matter. Welby himself said in November 2024, when he resigned, he said he felt shame at the safeguarding failures of the Church of England. So that was his own statement, that he felt shame. I just wanted to set the scene really for John Smyth, because that really is why, due to John Smyth's life and abuse of boys, that's really why Justin Welby has resigned. Interestingly enough, John Smyth was involved in a trust that gave holidays and breaks away for public school boys. It was quite an elite organisation, and it would focus often on the elite and the top public schools. John Smyth himself hadn't gone to one of the top public schools like Harrow or Winchester or Eton or Rugby. He had, however, gone to a public school, and he had actually become one of the youngest QCs, barrister, in England at the time. He was a very talented and a very charismatic speaker. He was involved in the Iwerne Trust, Iwerne, the Iwerne Trust, and that is where the story of him and Justin Welby, if you like, connects. Now, Welby states that he had no knowledge in the late 70s, early 80s of John Smyth's abuse, and we can't actually checked that. We don't know. However, in the early 80s, rumours were beginning to become firmed up. I'll come back to that a bit later. John Smyth was also involved in the public school, Winchester College, and in fact he moved a few miles from Winchester city itself, and was addressing and later grooming some of the boys at Winchester College. And the interesting modus operandi, the way that John Smyth worked, is he groomed young men, primarily or only young men, over a long period of time. One young man was groomed for several years and then abused in his late teens and early 20s for the first time. And that abuse came in the form of severe beatings. What Smyth would do is he would manipulate the idea of God as father, and he would then push the idea that he was the boy's earthly father and could justify for sins or errors. It could be things like for masturbation, or in his son's case, it was all around not achieving at school, and he would get 6 times 6 times 6, really hard strokes of the cane. Now, a corporal punishment was legal back into the mid 1980s. However, this went far beyond, if you like, normal corporal punishment for the time. It could be said that John Smyth was a narcissist who evaded justice. The public school movement, or public schools, were served by this Iwerne Trust, and Smyth manipulated his way into these holiday camps over a long period of time, and he groomed over a long period of time, and he had special boys who he groomed over time. And whilst Justin Welby attended some of these camps on a number of occasions, he denied all knowledge, and may well not have, although he may well have known, in fact, he did know John Smyth, he didn't know of his abuse. And that may well be true. It's very difficult to actually pin that down. So Welby attended these camps. Welby himself was an ex-Eton boy, and there was a very strict evangelical message, which I must say, from reading the Makin report, it sounds like John Smyth perverted, if you like, the orthodox Christian message about a God of love who sent his son Jesus into the world to save sinners. But what happened was Smyth very cleverly manipulated a number of boys. Now, you have to remember that many, if not all of these boys had left home. They'd left their mums and dads, and they were away at public school. So they wanted a family-friendly environment. And Smyth would invite them back to his house near Winchester. He was married. He would feed them. He would welcome them. He would be quite jovial with them. They would often go sailing, or they would go on trips together. And if you like, this was part of John Smyth's grooming technique. So the other thing to note about John Smyth is that he had one son, and he was an abuser at home as well. He beat his own son, perhaps not as much as some of the other boys, but certainly to excess. And there was a very interesting interview with John Smyth's son, who now lives in Texas, in the USA, stating that his son realized how badly he was treated, and although his loyalty as a son was first of all unquestioning, he began to see how he had been manipulated and indeed groomed himself. He states, Smyth's son does state, that his mother was also under the control of John Smyth. And John Smyth, although his wife, John Smyth's wife, was aware of the beatings, she seemed to be under Smyth's control. It doesn't appear that she was an active collaborator in that sense. Possibly she was afraid of him. So in the early 1980s, there was a clergyman called the Reverend Ruston, and he, with a group of other people, had realised what was happening. There were reports filtering out now that John Smyth was abusing boys. He had a specially built shed in his garden of his house that was even soundproofed, where these boys would be beaten. Now, beaten is the operative word here. They would be beaten till blood came, and they would actually have adult nappies given to them by Smyth's wife, who would look after these boys once they had been severely beaten. And this was a very an ongoing thing in the late 70s, early 80s. So the Ruston report came out in the early 1980s, and it was the first organised response to Smyth's abuse. But what it actually achieved was it almost it encouraged secrecy, and it just removed Smyth from his work at Winchester College. He was refused access into Winchester College by the Winchester head teacher, but it just removed him in time from the work in Iwerne, the Iwerne Trust. It was basically a cover-up. And sadly, Smyth went to Zimbabwe and then South Africa. And there are allegations of abuse. And he was even charged with murder of a young man in Zimbabwe. Charges eventually were dropped, as John Smyth was as I've said, a QC. He knew the criminal law, and he was very well in with the president of Zimbabwe, who I believe, from what I have read, ensured that the charges against John Smyth for culpable homicide against this boy who was found dead in the swimming pool in Zimbabwe were dropped, and there were other charges that were dropped as well. So he went on to live in Zimbabwe. He then, when things got a little bit more focused in Zimbabwe, no charges followed, he then moved to South Africa, where he remained without charge, and I believe that the abuse of boys carried on in South Africa as well. It is alleged that Welby knew, and this is something I mentioned earlier, he knew about Smyth's abuse in the early 1980s. Welby denies this, and we just don't know. There were obviously, because of the Ruston report, and Ruston was a clergyman who chaired that report, we just don't know whether Justin Welby knew more than perhaps he's letting on. Bringing the matter, if you like, into the 2017s, we have the first report by Cathy Newman, who is a Channel 4 reporter, journalist, who confronted Smyth actually in 2016, I think it was, and his death occurred in 2018. She confronted Smyth in one of these sort of walk-on interviews, face-to-face. Smyth categorically said, "I am not going to talk about this matter here," and he completely blanked Cathy Newman's approach. She is also, Cathy Newman, the reporter, has maintained an involvement right up to 2024 by interviewing Justin Welby and other people about this case. In fact, she interviewed the ex-social services director or social care director, Makin, as well as a number of other key people. So Welby stated initially that we're bringing this right up to date, and I'm sorry to skate over a long a longer period here because we're going into 15 minutes now, and I didn't want to keep this as a long thing. Welby stated initially he would not resign when the Makin review came out in November 2024. However, he folded to pressure. A petition was signed, and by the time Welby did resign in November of 2024, 14,000 people had signed that, and the Bishop of Newcastle had spoken out and said he must resign. She was the first bishop to actually state that. The matter was on national news. Politicians were getting involved, and Welby really couldn't resist the pressure. Welby himself was set to retire in 2026. He hasn't managed to hold the church together well, and we're just talking generally here. With other matters, he's ensured a potential split over marriage and blessings for same-sex couples, as well as quite contentious things about reparation for slavery. And he's, in the popular press, he's often been referred to as a woke archbishop of Canterbury. However, going back to the beginning, Welby made a statement. He's now resigned, and his duties will end in early January 2025. However, his duties are becoming less and less. The whole thing is a sorry story. The saddest thing, of course, is that John Smyth's abusive behaviour, both of his own family and many boys, both in England and in Zimbabwe and in Southern Africa, were never brought to justice. The police were beginning to investigate. However, with the ending of his life, he was never brought to justice. And there are some very telling stories by the survivors, one of whom is a guy called Mark Stibber, and he has very eloquently stated how Smyth abused him. He's gone public, if you like. There are many boys who have stated the abuse that that Smyth did on them. However, they have maintained their anonymity. Thank you for listening. I'm sorry it's not a particularly uplifting topic, but I did want to cover it. So thank you very much. Have a good day.